Howdy, my name is Kyle Schultze, and I will be starting us off. And we did a project over the distribution of bike racks along the Texas A&M campus. Our main hypothesis was looking at the proximity of the bike racks to the different buildings to tell if they were being used correctly or if they were being used at all. Some of the major issues we took into account were bike racks are incredibly important because this is one of the major transportation methods that many students use. A big issue is there are not enough bike rack spaces to some of the buildings, such as Evans Library during heavy study hours around finals time and whatnot. Another one is there are too many bike racks in areas that don't need them, like buildings that maybe have more administrative uses than class uses. Some future stuff we would have liked to look at was the necessity for bike rack security and how, if there were not enough spots for the bikes, how it could have affected attendance to some other classes. Next up, I'm going to have Megan talk about methods.
For the parameters of our survey, we chose a 4-day duration between Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., during what we consider to be rush hour. On the first day of our survey, we just did a general sweep of the sections where we record the GPS, took a approximate capacity, and then a rough percentage of how full it was. After collecting all the data, we took our points and projected them onto a series of maps, which after we did a statistical analysis based on category in which the bike racks were in, whether it was food, class-based, study-based, housing, parking, administration, things like that, or like the MSC or rudder, which have multiple purposes. For our survey, we divided main campus primarily among our 5 members of the group. My region was Region 1, which was primarily the library and a classroom settings. I also had Butyl, which is more of a multi-purpose. In my region, there were 22 stations, approximately 2,064 bikes that could fit. However, there were very few that were near capacity, if anything, so not a lot of changes, pretty steady.
Howdy, this is Brian Thomas. For my region, I covered Region 2, which covered the MSC, most of the multi-purpose areas, some of the major parking areas, and the dormitories north along the university. Within this area, we saw a bike capacity of up to almost 6,100, with a capacity over 75% for each of these locations. So we're talking heavily occupied. Most racks were typically full, with a lot of the bikes being just casted off on the ground.
I handled Region 3, which was the majority of the north side of campus, minus Hall Blue Hall and some of the areas near there. A lot of my area of campus was classroom buildings, and I also took into account ETB and Lot 50. There were around 19 stations in my area. The bike capacity was around 2,400. And normally, on average, it was around 50% capacity at most of the stations.
I had the 4th region, which had a variety of buildings. There are a couple academic buildings, such as the O&M building, the liberal arts building, and other large ones, as well as many study areas, such as the Student Computing Center or the Annex. Many of these bike racks were not that full. There were some crowded ones near the Annex and other study areas, whereas there were ones near administrative buildings that were not very full at all.
Hi, I had Region 5. In my section, there were 20 group of bike racks. Each, in total, they could hold 2,500 bikes. 20% of them were over 75% capacity on average. Here's a map that I made that has, it displays the capacities of the bike racks. You can see like by the MSC over here and by the dorms over here, bike racks are large. They can hold a lot of bikes, which is good. Here's a buffer map with 10 and 20 meter buffers showing which buildings each bike rack potentially serves. And here's a kernel density map showing where bike racks are grouped on campus. So you can see certain areas like around Kyle Field, around the core, and up at this new building up here. there aren't that many bike racks, and that potentially should change. And now we're going to start looking at the occupancy ratings of the bike racks. So over our 4-day study period, we tracked how full as a percentage each bike rack is. So you can look at some areas like by the MSC over here and up here. You can say as I flip through the days, they consistently stay red, which means that they are 80 to 100 plus percent full. And here is a map showing the 4-day average occupancy rate. Those same areas are red, and in some cases there are bikes, just not parked in a bike rack, which is not what we want to see.
For the sectoral analysis, we basically collected all the capacity ratings for each of these locations as far as admin goes, classes, food areas, health, housing, multipurpose, parking, and study areas are. We had a high capacity, however, the average use for a lot of these were near 96%, if not greater, or lower than 36%. So there's a good mix between the high populated areas and the low ones. So the major data limits for our analysis include areas like this around the CSA and by the food trucks, whereas a lot of our data is based on averages that have, and these areas that have high occupancy levels are construed by data from other areas like this location where, as you can see, there are no bikes here present. These areas like this and other locations construe the data towards lower average ratings compared to what they should be where they are in the 90s. This section around the CSA, where there were 108 potential spots, but was on average only 8% full. This drove our data from a 99% occupancy rating down to an 88. There are other locations around campus that cause the same event across the board for other locations.
So the distribution of the bike racks can be problematic, and what we need are going to be some bold solutions. Or we could change the placement of future bike racks. For example, when we measured racks that are primarily used for food, housing, and multi-purpose areas such as the MSC tended to be over 75% full. Whenever we add new bike racks, these should be prioritized because they have a much higher need. However, there's some other bike racks near like parking and administration buildings that are less than 50% full. Whenever we are going to add more bike racks in, these should be have the least prioritization. So this experiment was a good start, but there's much more feature work that could be done. We only focused on main campus, so if we wanted to do more, we could check out West Campus, since this is an area with many students and probably has its own distribution problems. We could also compare the occupation at different times of night instead of just during lunch. At night, there might be more crowded libraries and housing areas. We'd also measure at different times of the year, such as during finals, since those will have their own different bike needs. We'd also determine an average full rack, since this was a somewhat subjective lab. That way we could more accurately give a percentage of how full it is instead of a rough estimation. We could also survey the student body and see if these bike issues have, for example, made them late to class, made them discouraged from coming, or they have not felt safe having their bikes on campus because they couldn't find a rack. The last thing we could do is whenever we take a future experiment, we could cycle the surveyors per section. So instead of one person measuring the section 4 times, that person will measure all 4 stations, which should balance out biases.